Just find a letter. Hey, we're live, everybody. Hey, it's Friday. It's July. What time is it? I'm back from vacation finally, feeling refreshed. Yeah, it was great. The Q&A streams were great while I was gone. I was stuck on the T-Box 2 weeks in a row on a Friday, so I tuned in momentarily and checked in. It seemed like everybody was having a good time. Daniel, how the heck are you?
Good. I'm happy you're back. It was we had some fun while you were gone, but it's nice to have the band back together. So
there we go. All righty. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll start off just like we always do with the weekend review. Boy, oh boy, what a week! What a couple of weeks after this Lockheed memo. Do you want to talk about the supplier meltdown that we heard about this week, Daniel?
I would love to. So June 30th. Lockheed published a memo blog on their supply chain website and said in the most sanitized way, kind of get right or get left. Basically, hey, you should have already done this, NIST standard 171 thing, but then also you need to prepare by working with a NIST MEP or by working with somebody from the Cyber AV marketplace. You need to prepare for certification. And that started a spiraling event. And then this week, we've heard of two new developments. So apparently Lockheed has some sort of supplier meeting of some sort. We don't know the details of it, but we do know someone that was in attendance. And this got brought up. And the whole room was like, what is CMMC? What the freak is going on? What's happening? And then a company that I work with has a relative that works for the Lockheed supply chain group. And he was asking, like, what is this CMMC thing? Everybody is freaking out about it. And so I've heard multiple times on calls this week, people referencing it. People that don't know about it, when they see it, they're like, wait a second. Like, what does this exactly mean? Like, Lockheed's going to come audit us if our CCRA isn't fully met, which is the cybersecurity risk assessment that Lockheed, jointly agreed upon for supply chains. I can just tell you right now, I'm seeing more action. We actually did a Google Trends check of CMMC compliance, and there was a massive uptick in search the week that this blog got dropped by Lockheed. And it's the only real newsworthy event that happened in the CMMC ecosystem that we're aware of. So it's the second highest spike in like the last 12 months.
That's crazy.
Which in the last 12 months, 32 CFR came out. So like it just shows that some people aren't paying attention to the DoD, but they are definitely paying attention to Lockheed.
What's super interesting too, because we did the podcast this week because I was catching up on what I missed while I was gone. And the biggest thing was this memo that came out. It got posted by Lockheed. And then as I was reading up on it, we found out they've posted 5 other memos in the last 18 months. But for some reason, this one is the one that got everybody's attention, even though when you read those other 5 memos, they all say the same thing. You should already be confidently implementing and meeting the requirements in 171 Rev 2. So I don't know what I think the bonus is Lockheed cyber team's going to come audit you for unmet controls for CMMC. Huge and prepare to undergo certification. Those two statements, at least in the last blogs that I read from Lockheed, those two things weren't present. And I think that impact of like, holy crap, am I gonna still be able to do business in the I'll call it the Turner Burns sign guys, right? You see them at Mardi Gras and all that. There's a saying that they use called get right or get left. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is like Lockheed saying get right or get left for their supply chain in the most, again, lawyer approved way that they could. And it's freaking people out. Well, it just goes to show this thing that we've talked about in the past, where the thing that gets people's attention is the threat of being audited, because Lockheed literally put out verbatim. They copy and pasted from memo to memo the same language. And to your point, the only difference between this one and the other 5 memos, which there's been one every 2 months for the last year and a half. The only difference now is they're like, we're going to come check. And then boom, all the attention. They're like, whoa, what do you mean you're going to come check? Same thing with CMMC.
Like no one pays attention. Nobody does it. It's a joke. It's this, it's lip service. And then they're going to come audit you. And then, whoa. Now all of a sudden it's a huge deal. So, when I sort of zoom out and look at it all together, it's like, even when Lockheed says you really ought to be doing this, you really ought to be cleaning your room and eating your vegetables, when they come and they say they're going to check, that's when people pay attention, which just reinforces to me the idea that unless you have some sort of third-party verification in some form of consequence, people just don't take it seriously. So
absolutely. We are seeing that in spades right now. So I say all that to say is we talk about this intermittently, but backlogs are growing for implementers all across the board, not just Summit 7. So this Lockheed was like a shot of adrenaline in a lot of the conversations I've been having with people who are like, holy crap, we have to do something now. So most of the people watching this live stream are very proactive. The fact that you're watching this is a great sign of that. But for a large swath of the industry that literally just found out about this because of this Lockheed blog, please do something, and do something quick, because you're going to miss the boat, as Jacob likes to say.
Yeah, absolutely. All righty. Well, somewhat related. Let's see here. Somewhat related. I found this to be fascinating.
I saw this the other day.
Yeah. So you constantly hear, like, one of the main things that you hear people talk about is people are leaving the DIB. They're leaving the DIB. The DIB is shrinking. They're evaporating. They're going away. And CMMC is bad because the DIB is getting smaller, right?
Yep.
And it has been almost the policy of the United States government to allow this to happen since the 1980s, right? Like, this is a macro level trend that has been happening long before something like CMMC ever came around. So, but a lot of people will conflate these 2 points, and they'll say the DIB is shrinking. CMMC will push people out of the DIB. Therefore, CMMC bad because we need the DIB to not shrink. Well, as it turns out, yes, the DIB is contracting, but apparently, according to actual researchers, not to disparage the the annual reports that come out from industry groups representing DIB companies who have a vested interest in saying that they're going to leave and therefore you need to not regulate them and give them more money. NDIA's health of the DIB report that they do every year. Some actual PhD level data scientists went through and did a big report, and they found out that defense companies are not exiting the DIB at such a fast rate. I went through, and we're going to have to do like a whole podcast on these reports, or find these guys and get them on, because the data is pretty intense. But they found that the exits from the DIB are not all they're cracked up to be, that even though there is this trend of companies leaving the DIB, it's much slower and smaller than people think, because apparently what happens is when you ask people, are you participating in the DIB? They say no. They don't follow up and ask, well, are you wanting to participate in the DIB and just haven't won anything? Are you between contracts? Would you be participating in the DIB had you won a contract? And a lot of people go, yeah, we'll do it if we win, but we didn't win, so we're not in the DIB, right? So it's very, very interesting.
Can you zoom in on that chart? I'm curious on what.
So there's a bunch of really interesting ones that came up. And like I said, we'll have to go through more of the details. But from this article, which is probably the most accessible version of the data, they say the most frequent reason given by companies was an unfavorable working condition with the DoD. But the second and third most frequent reason what companies hadn't that aren't participating in the DIB is they hadn't won any contracts recently. Not that they're trying to get out of DoD work altogether.
Interesting.
So
it's amazing one additional question, what extra clarity that can bring.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I need to dig more into the data. This is something to do over the weekend. And I really want to compare this data with the vital signs reports that NDIA puts out, because I think that would be very interesting, because there's annual testimony to Congress based off of NDIA's findings. And you see a lot of these talking points on LinkedIn and other social media about the DIB is shrinking. And I want to know more about what these guys found, because, when you go through the report, I mean, This report is freaking huge, and there's just tons and tons and tons of data in here. Apparently, there's a bunch of them that I went through and looked, and in a related report that they had for reasons given for DIB exit, CMMC is down here at like less than 10% of the reason.
I think the other 90% don't know it's happening. So that's probably
that's true. Yeah. So there's a bunch of reasons that people give for why they're leaving, and they correct for different responses and stuff. The data is really, really interesting. But if you just have a little bit of time, I'd say read this article from Federal News Network. And it's like awesome. I said on LinkedIn, NDA has been real quiet since this one dropped. So we'll see what they have to say about it later on.
Is it the Boroni Research Center or something like? How do you even say that?
Yeah, it's who was it? Where was it? Blah, blah, blah,
I expected like MITRE or somebody to have generated this report.
Yeah, it's I think they're a research center out of George Mason.
Okay.
The Greg and Camille Baroni Center for Government Contracting and the Costello College of Business at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. Apparently, this article is derived from a report that they wrote, which was based on a survey of like 45,000 defense contractors that they did in 2024.
Wow.
And so I'm very interested to dive into it a little bit more. So guys, check out the Federal News Network article, and then we'll definitely be doing some more coverage of it. But main takeaway, people are leaving the DIB, but not exactly the way that people think. So I found that to be very interesting.
That's very interesting.
All righty. Dana Dog, I missed you too, buddy. I missed you too.
Aww.
The dynamic duo is back. Dark Green, I was thinking about you while I was golfing. I was like, I wonder what Dark Green's doing. Brad Shannon's here, our very own Brad Shannon. Brad Shannon apparently was having a existential meltdown because he found out that Intel and AMD are not as the same that they used to be 10 years ago. AMD CPUs are pretty great. Yeah, whole sidebar thing. Mariano said, I hope this helps people realizing what CMMC is and that it's not going anywhere. Listen, this is the interesting thing about the podcast, right? Is when we went back and we looked at all the previous blog memo things from Lockheed where they use the same language as this most recent one, they always publish those after something happened. So when they were moving to the CCRA questionnaire, they published the blog after it was announced. When the 32 CFR proposed rule was published in December of 2023, they published a blog after. They published it after the 48 CFR proposed rule. They published one after the 32 CFR final rule. They published one after the class deviation for 7012. This one is different because nothing has happened. And so we don't have the 48 CFR final rule, but they've come out and they've said, okay, time's up. But this isn't. So, for instance, when they said we're moving to this single questionnaire, the CCRA, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, there were some questions about it. They said, okay, we're going to have a 6-month time period where we transition. There wasn't a blog 6 months later. We're like over a year later, and now they're saying, hey, you should have been transitioned to it. And they've been saying for 18 months, hey, you should have been fully implemented in meeting 171 Rev 2. There hasn't been any catalyst or deadline that's come up that has changed externally from the customer. So I'm wondering what Lockheed knows. Is this just a lag in the system and that's how long they take to take it seriously? Did something happen at the DoD level and the mega primes know what's around the corner? It's just unusual in this series of memos that they put out that this one doesn't seem to be triggered by some external regulatory event. It just seems to be of their own volition, which makes it even more powerful in my opinion, because they're just doing.
Maybe mean the 48 CFR is getting closer. Maybe. I mean,
maybe. Let's see here. Brad said they just assumed it would never happen. And seems there's still people who are assuming that. It is a strategy. It is a strategy. You could bet on the 12 on the craps table, but it could happen. It's just not at this point, doesn't seem very probable. So Michelle says there's also a bit of proximity bias where the thing about to hit you over the head is what you are now going to focus on.
So there's
a really good book called The Gray Rhino. It's one of my favorite books. It's really, really interesting. And the author, she talks about how a lot of people, after something bad happens, they say, oh, this was a black swan event. And as it turns out, she says, well, actually, most of these black swan events are what she calls gray rhinos, where they're obvious dangers, like right there running at you is a gigantic gray rhino and you ignored it. So she goes into all the reasons why people ignore stuff that's like staring them right in the face for being a big deal. And then they blame it as an anomaly later on. So yeah, the Gray Rhino, check it out. It's a great book. Let's see. The Jabroni Research Center at the New Jersey Waste Management. Yeah. That's hilarious. Yeah. I want a t-shirt. All right, let's see here. Okay, so we had a bunch of questions on the CUIHotline.org form in the backlog that we can get to. So you guys can always go to CUIHotline.org. You call the number and we can listen to your question there. You can fill out the form, especially if you have a really long question. That's a great place to do it. You can always send us DMs and everything as well. So, okay. So this person said, we're interviewing MSSPs, managed security service providers, outsourced firms who would do your security operations type of work. We're interviewing MSSPs and we're told that they do not participate when we go through a CMMC certification. Can they just give us evidence? Is that standard? I believe that when I was reading other parts of this question, they were saying, yeah, they said they would give us the evidence and we can talk about it. But they're not going to be sitting at the table answering questions during the assessment. So Daniel, you talk to tons of people who are calling us, shopping around, talking to lots of different vendors and lots of different operations. One of the things that we always stress to people is the nature of the shared responsibility matrix between you and a company, a service provider, a consultant, whoever that you are outsourcing these obligations to.
Yep.
And who is responsible for what? Like literally a racy matrix, like a responsible, accountable, consulted, informed breakdown of all of the assessment objectives in NIST SP 800-171A. You are paying us to do this work. We are going to be responsible for answering questions about this, this, and this. We have to work together to answer these, and these. You, the customer, are the only ones who can answer this, and this, right? That's why the SRM is so important. But what do you think in terms of, is this what you're seeing? Are people getting caught up, suddenly realizing that their service providers are not going to bail them out and answer the questions for them? What do you think?
Yes, I'm seeing this a lot in the sense of I've had probably in the last 3 months, maybe 5 or 6 companies come to us and say, hey, our MSP that we had a handshake deal with that said, we'll do this CMMC with you, are bowing out altogether in the CMMC space. Because people have to realize MSPs and MSSPs, they aren't typically industry tailored, right? So they don't have the infrastructure to support really nuanced requirements. FedRAMP Clouds is the example we use all the time, right? For tools that have CUI. And so anyways, we're seeing this a lot. What I have pulled up here is the CAP, CMMC assessment process. And it says about showing up or not showing up. When an assessor employs the interview method to validate a security requirement on the customer or client responsibility matrix that is assigned to the ESP, which an MSSP would be, the ESP respondent must demonstrate sufficient knowledge and credible ownership of that requirement. No different than that which is required for an OSC representing a security requirement under its own responsibility. This reads to me like the ESP has to show up if there is an interview-based question and answer the question that they're doing it or not, period. This whole not showing up thing is not something that you can just decide to do. The assessor, very likely, if they're deploying the interview method, will require you to phone a friend and speakerphone and at least be able to respond to the interview questions that they have. So
the thing that jumps out to me is the reason that you're paying a company to do this work is not just because it's cheaper. For most people, it's because you can't do it. You don't know how to do it. It's not worth the time to invest to train yourself or your team or to hire the people to do it. So you don't know how you're doing these things. That's what you're paying them for. But then when someone comes in and says, please explain to me how you're doing this, you're not going to be able to answer it before we get into any of the details. Like just on its face, how are the questions going to get answered if the people doing the work aren't in the room? So I think people are going to have a big problem on their hands if this is especially if it's a handshake deal. I mean,
yeah,
that's not a good situation.
We're hearing a lot of that right now, where people said, yeah, we'll do the CMMC thing with you. Again, I mentioned earlier, and they're just starting to fall back and say, nope, go find somebody else. So the problem is switching an MSP is not trivial work.
No,
it takes a lot of work to do it. And there's backlogs and there's onboarding. And, you know, I've had some companies come to us, one that actually just signed, that had an assessment date scheduled, and then the MSP bowed out.
Whoa.
And it's like, what the heck? Like, have really solid contracts, not saying that they can't, cancel, terminate, etc. But there needs to be significant penalties at a minimum that you get to reclaim. And they should pay for switching costs to a new MSP that is going to support you.
Man, that's like doing a brain transplant.
Yeah,
that's pretty intense.
So, Dark Green, you're right.
I mean,
if
anything,
MSP will not participate, find a new MSSP. Find a new MSP.
I mean, if anything, it could take longer, because there could be bad habits and debt that's been built up from the way that they ran stuff, and you got to transition it over. That's interesting. I gotta write this down, because I wonder if I'm sure the team has stories inside of when we've taken over work from other MSPs, and they're like, this is what we always have to clean up whenever we take over for people who said, oh yeah, it's not going to be a big deal.
Well,
so
I'll tell you the major one every time. They're typically not using compliant systems, either to manage it, or they haven't advised the client that they can't use certain things anymore. And it's like, so they get to us and they're like, wait, our MSP said we were CMMC compliant. They only looked at NIST 171, and a lot of times not even the assessment objectives. This FedRAMP thing never crossed their minds because they didn't read the MSP blog on all the requirements. Like, it's crazy out there, the types of companies we talk to that think they're way further along. Then when they have to switch because their MSP's backing out, realize they have to start closer to ground zero.
All right, everybody, let's play Would You Rather. Would you rather? All right, everybody ready? Listen up, everybody. Click back into the window from what you were doing for work. Would you rather be the Lockheed supplier that found out that CMMC was going to be a thing this week when they had their supplier meeting and they said, get the cert or get the heck out? Or would you rather be the supplier who thought that you were good to go with the handshake deal with your MSP, and now you need to transition to a new one? Which one would you rather be? Let us know in the chat. Daniel,
I think I would rather be the Lockheed company. I'm gonna be honest. I think I would rather be Lockheed, because at least I didn't waste money and time with somebody. Yeah. I think I'd rather be the Lockheed guy.
You'd rather be like fresh, like greenfield, starting from zero. At this point, I think I would too, because the ability to learn, like, there's so much more information now. Like, there's this Q&A, and there's the blogs, and there's S7 lives, and there's our Secure the Dib summer event, and there's CS5. There's just so much more information now that you can get potentially, that I feel like if I were going to be one, I would be the unaware supplier getting caught flat-footed rather than the overconfident supplier getting rug pulled by my MSP.
Absolutely.
Yeah, people will say, the Lockheed supplier,
across the board.
The first option, the Lockheed supplier. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's probably a good one. This is so funny, because it's like, anybody who's listening, if your MSP has promised you the world, no one in chat would want to be you if you're wrong. They would rather be finding out today that CMMC is a thing rather than being in your situation. That's pretty crazy. All righty, let's see here. Alexander said, do you think 171 revision 3 will be a requirement for CMMC in the coming year? Is it a good idea to start implementing 171 Rev 3 in the coming year? So will 171 Rev 3 be a requirement for CMMC in 2026? I don't think so. So
now in Canada likes to play with Rev 3, but
Canada,
in the US,
you never know.
I agree, Jacob.
I do not think it will be a requirement in 2026, because 171 Rev 3 will be the requirement when the CMMC program rule is updated to point to 171 Rev 3 as the set of requirements to be assessed during CMMC assessments. Until that happens, CMMC will not be assessing 171 Rev 3. It will only be assessing 171 Rev 2. And so although we have heard that the 32 CFR program rulemaking is underway internally, we know that that process takes a long time. They would have to publish the proposed rule. We'd have to go through comments. They'd have to adjudicate those comments. They'd have to go back through the process, publish the final rule, so on and so forth. At a minimum, that process would take 12 to 18 months. And I really doubt that they're going to have that rule published before the end of this year. Even if they did, it wouldn't be 2026. So I'm going to go second half of 2027 at the very earliest.
Because there's also going to be a phased roll-in, right? I mean, they can't just flip the switch and say, now we're on CMMC 3.0.
Well, and anybody who has their CMMC L2 cert for a 3-year window is going to have the cert valid, and you won't need to update it to the new version of CMMC afterwards. That's almost certainly not going to be DoD policy. So to answer your question, no, I don't think it will be a requirement in 2026. Very confident that it won't be a requirement in 2026. It will be a requirement when they update it, but based off everything we know right now, you still have 2, maybe 3 years. If that changes, obviously you'll hear about it. But is it a good idea to start implementing Rev 3? We've heard this from some people, Daniel, where they're like, well, do I want to future-proof my implementation for Rev 3? Should I just stick with what's going on with Rev 2? I think there's a case to be made that working on Rev 3 is totally fine. The only problem is that you have to juggle some of the requirements that went away in Rev 3 to answer during your assessment for CMMC against Rev 2. It's also more stuff to do compared to 171 Rev 2. If you have the time and you have the resources and your organization has the appetite, I don't think that it's unmanageable. If you're starting from zero, if you're under a time crunch, if you have a resource constraint at all, I wouldn't recommend it.
The best of both worlds right now is take the ODPs for the controls that are 1 and 1 in Rev 2 and Rev 3, or close enough because there was some bundling that happened. Take those ODPs and populate them into your Rev 2 deployment. That way you can at least have a leg up, maybe not on implementing all the Rev 3 controls, but at least having alignment for the enforcement of, like, what is it, the 10-year unique identifier, right? Like all of those nuanced ODPs as part of that as well.
Yeah, and you can find those on the resources page for CIO if you want to check out what those look like. Alrighty, yeah, good question. Alrighty, let's see here. What is the cybersecurity compliance and risk assessment tool, the CCRA? Is it just a redundant CMMC self-assessment? So the CCRA is a singular tool that the ND-ISAC and the DIBS Sector Coordinating Council, so all the mega primes, got together and they said, we need a single tool that people are going to use as a questionnaire to represent their cybersecurity compliance posture to us when they're doing work for us. So it is a single spreadsheet, and this was referenced in those Lockheed memos, which is probably where the question is coming from. And it's a giant spreadsheet. It's a giant questionnaire. You have to enable macros in order for it to work. And it's, got information about the submitting organization, what we're supposed to be using it for. You can read more about this in the Lockheed blogs that we linked on the podcast this week, or the Summit 7 blog that links to everything. So it's got this questionnaire that you got to walk through, and it's got stuff like, have you implemented everything? Do you have a POAM? Do you have an SPRS score? What's the date of your SPRS score? What's the level of confidence in your SPRS score? And then based off of those questions, they'll go through the individual requirements in 171, and you're supposed to mark the status of being, is it implemented or not, right? And then based off of your results and your answers, it gives you you're compliant, you're not compliant, whatever, these various outputs. And then you're supposed to upload those results into their supplier portal, Exostar, places like that. So it's this singular questionnaire for you to represent yourself to these major primes. A couple problems, right? We talked about on the podcast, we got to do a more detailed episode on this tool. Does anybody notice? Pop quiz, everybody. Pop quiz chat. Does anybody see a problem with, let's say, trying to verify whether someone has implemented 3.4.1? So requirement 3.4.1, establish and maintain baseline configurations and inventories of organizational systems throughout their respective system development lifecycle. Are you doing that?
Jacob, I dare question, where is my good friend the assessment objective associated with this control?
There are no assessment objectives here. It just says, are you doing it? Yes, no. And so I don't know. How do you know if you're doing it? And so it is a questionnaire, but it isn't a self-assessment really. You're just sort of saying, yeah, we did it, generating some, yeah, we did it results over on the results panel, and then uploading that to your customer. And that's kind of it. So is it just a redundant CMMC self-assessment? It is a little redundant because it's a questionnaire. It's one form of questionnaire for all of them. So it cuts out the duplicative nature of having to answer a Northrop questionnaire and a Lockheed questionnaire and an RTX questionnaire. But it is not a self-assessment in the way that it doesn't generate an SPRS score. It doesn't tell you which assessment objectives you're missing. It's not actually conducting a verification questionnaire against the requirements in 171A. So you can't calculate a score off of it. You can't really use it as a sufficient self-assessment. So it isn't really robust enough to be considered redundant with self-assessment. It's just self-attestation with a lot more steps.
I'm putting it out there. So it has incident response. It has the controls, doesn't have assessment objectives, doesn't have FedRAMP clouds for CUI. And like those two gotchas are huge. And I think, and I made this little call out in the podcast we did this week, Jacob, I think that Lockheed is under a false pretense of how compliant their supply chain actually is if somebody has 110 here.
Yeah, I think that the way we described it in the podcast is this is a CYA tool for Lockheed, because they're like, we came up with this whole form and it says, do you have an SRM? Do you flow it down to your subs? Are you making your subs compliant? Do you have all 110 of these things implemented? If not, do you have a POAM? What's the date of your POAM? Do you have an SPRS score? What level is your SPRS score? Bing, bang, boom. Okay, they told us they're good. We put out blogs that said you're good. And then now the CMMC thing is coming up. And so if they don't make it, not our fault, right? So 171 is not mentioned in here, which is kind of a bummer. I know NDISAC's aware of it, so it would be nice. But then again, I guess it's one of those things where it's like, do they want to make a tool where you have to answer all 320? I mean, that's what's going to be asked during the assessment. So that's what the CCRA is. Is it redundant? No, because it's a single supplier questionnaire. Yes, because it's a bunch of stuff you got to do that doesn't actually give you a score or prepare you for an assessment or give you an idea of where you're at. So,
and here's the bonus. You have to enable macros in order to run it. That's a little side asterisk there. So just be prepared.
Yeah. This is just at the requirement level, Megan. So these questions here where they say, okay, have you done 3.2.1? Your only option is yes, no. It doesn't say 3.2.1 A, B, C, and everything in 171A. So let's see. Yeah, where are the 171A determination statements? They're not in here. Yeah. Caleb's here. Just Lockheed meeting their contract requirements.
That is spot on.
That's
Caleb.
right. That's right. So that's exactly what's going on in terms of what's happening with that questionnaire. And as they said, as we talked about in the podcast, as you said in your video, as we said in our blog, Lockheed has said, February 2024, everybody's got to move to this version of the attestation form 6 months from now. That's the only one we're accepting. Then they put out their blog last month and they said, okay, you should be fully using this questionnaire. You should be fully implemented. Here we go. And here we go. The bus flying off the end of the bridge here.
Here's what's funny. In the blog, it says Lockheed cyber teams will be reaching out for people with unmet controls. I wonder how they're going to determine if a control is unmet or not of their suppliers, right? It's just so many things that, it's a lot of fun. Caleb, also, you pick your profile picture. Looks like you're a male model there, a little Men's Warehouse modeling there. So
yeah, definitely. Looking full Mad Men in the profile pic, looking good. All right, let's see here. We had a bunch of other stuff.
I like the new LinkedIn banners, by the way, the new comment banners.
Yeah, looks nice. Yeah, looks nice. Okay, let's see here. When do you estimate the move to 171 R3? Like we talked about, 2 to 3 years based off of what we know right now. There's a bunch of stuff that has to happen before we do that. Namely, the new version of the 32 CFR program rule has to go into its final form. They haven't published the proposed version of that yet. I don't think they're going to do that by the end of this year based off the way that things are going. So it's not going to be a requirement for a while. But like Daniel said, if you want to get started ahead of time, use the ODPs for 171 Rev 3 in your current implementations of Rev 2. That's a good middle ground there. So, all right, what action should we take to verify a sub's SPRS score in accordance with DFARS 7020? They could just Photoshop a screenshot. Hey, well, if you're Lockheed Martin, like Caleb said, you could just send them the CCRA questionnaire and then say, hey, fill this out. But yeah, DFARS 7020, we did a podcast video on the DFARS cyber series, all the clauses. We're almost done with that series. And in 7020 at the bottom, it says you can't award this contract to anybody that you flow this information down to unless you have verified that they have a basic summary score posted in SPRS. Problem is you don't have access to SPRS, so you can't verify what their score is or if they have one. So you just have to take their word for it and then get the attestation from them and then say, okay, they told us they had one. I don't know what to tell you.
Here's the question. So let's say they did lie about it. Does false claims come after the prime or the sub that lied on that private contract?
Well, I mean, if they attested to you that they have a score and you have no manner of verifying if that's true, you just have to take their word for it and be like, we pinky promise, we sign right here that says we're making an official attestation to you. I mean, that's what the CCRA is doing, right? Just like Caleb said. And so they would go after them. I mean, this is what a third-party certification solves for, right? Is that you no longer have to do this back and forth where you have to show up and you do the assessment or believe them or whatever. Some other party's taking care of it. And because of the way that system works, they have a cert that they can show you. And so therefore you don't have to do any of that other verification. Like that's why you have third-party certs. But until that system is up and running, this is all we got.
All we got.
So, yeah. All righty. Let's see.
By the way, CCRA is a publicly available like download if you do want to use it for your supply chain.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Which you guys, Lockheed seems to control a lot of the dibs, so I'm sure people are very familiar. Yes. Totally not caught off guard with what's going on with CCRA. Let's see. Is there an estimate on when the 48 CFR will drop? Fall of this year, based off what we know. I tried my best casting spells and doing dark rituals on PTO to get the rule published while I was on vacation.
We got the Lockheed thing, so I mean, some kind of
something's happening.
Gone, so.
Something's happening. I gotta. My spell casting is not as good as it used to be, I guess. So, should be fall-ish. I think if I remember the math correctly, getting the rule sent from DoD over to OIRA. That's the next big milestone. So sending the final rule over to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, standard regulatory review process for rulemaking. When that happens, that's what starts the clock for final regulatory review, which is 90 to 120 days, probably closer to 90. And then it would go over to the Office of the Federal Register to be published, which is usually about 2-ish weeks-ish. So a July publication, a July OIRA move would result most likely in an October-ish final rule. We know that we can publish rules up until the day after Christmas. So, it could slide into later this year, but really we won't have a more certain cone of when these things could happen until we see it go to OIRA. And I've heard through the grapevine that is imminent. But it's also summer and things slow down in the summer because that's just how the Beltway works. You get a big flurry of stuff in the first half of the year. You get a big flurry of stuff from September through the holidays. And then the lead up from like Memorial Day to August is just like slowing everything down. So we'll just have to see what goes from there. But yeah, I'm still guessing fall, second half of this year, almost certainly. Okay, what initiatives is the DoD undertaking to better internally handle its own CUI and related processes?
I appreciate the question. The last report, Jacob, isn't see, wasn't there a report last year about how the DoD has made strides on more appropriately marking things, but they were still very far off the target? Didn't the Pentagon or somebody fancy do that?
I wanted to, you'll have to forgive me, because the last time that Katie was taking questions from the audience that I was at Seek West in Las Vegas. And Vegas being Vegas, I just wasn't on the ball like I should be. There's a lot of golf. There's gambling in Vegas. There's a lot of things to do in Vegas. What I should have asked her was, hey, a couple years ago at this point, this IG report came out and said, actually, the DoD is systematically undermarking all of this CUI for training reasons and for technological reasons that the DoD CIO is in charge of. What I should have asked her was, what are you as the DoD CIO now doing about the findings in that report? It wasn't all on the DoD CIO. The DoD CUI program is under the Office of the Undersecretary in Defense. It's OSD-INS. It's Intelligence, and somebody look up OSD-INS. I can't remember the acronym, but it's a different office. There's OSD-ANS, Acquisition and Sustainment. There's DoD CIO. There's OSD-RNE, Research and Engineering. There's a bunch of different undersecretaries of defense. The Undersecretary of Defense for INS is responsible for the DoD CUI program. The DoD CIO only has tangential things that are related to helping them execute the CUI program. This is the problem with blaming the CMMC program for failings of the DoD's CUI program. They are not run by the same Undersecretary of Defense office. So the CUI CMMC program are unrelated from each other. Intelligence and security. Great. Thank you. Thank you. And so as a result, when you say, well, the CUI program is a problem, the CMMC PMO, Stacy Bosjanik, and those guys are like, well, I don't know what to tell you. Like, well, that's not our program. This report that came out said, well, there are things that are obviously INS's fault. INS never does conferences. They don't go outside. They don't answer questions, right? Like they're not interested. Katie, however, as the DoD CIO, could maybe answer questions about the part of that report that said a lot of the people that the IG interviewed around the DoD components said we would be marking the CUI appropriately, but we don't have the tools to do so because the previous DoD CIO said we're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
Which really pissed me off when I read the report, because I'm like, this is the main thing that everybody talks about. Everywhere you go is they're like the CUI problem, the marking problem. So I'd be interested to ask Katie if any progress has been made on that, because the IG reports are very helpful. The problem is we don't really get a lot of information on what happens after they're done, right? So it's like, okay, we've got this issue, and then maybe it gets resolved, but they don't ever write follow-ups. So yeah, what initiatives are they undertaking? No idea. Are they undertaking them? Doesn't seem like it. I don't know. I don't know. Does anybody know in chat? Anybody? Let's see here. Yeah, we got the answer there for INS. Blah 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 blah. Rich Bates having a great time. Best profile pic that we have so far. I know the answer. Nothing.
Yeah, that's probably a fair response.
Sounds about right. So yeah, I don't know. If anybody finds out, let us know. If anybody sees Katie, walking her dog or whatever, then make sure you ask the question about that CUI report. All right. Is there a link or doc we can point business execs to? They have no idea what CMMC is. Then where would you point people if they have no idea what? You just got out of a meeting with Lockheed. It's Friday. So, what would you point them to?
I'm building something for a prospect right now that could be useful, and I might end up disseminating it to the larger team here. But DoD CIO website is really good. And if it's okay, Jacob, you want me to share kind of what I've been working on here?
No, please. Absolutely. Breaking news, everybody, on the CUI hotline.
Let me sanitize it really fast. Okay, and it's not done, so please don't judge me.
Okay, this is work in progress, everybody. We're friends here. We're all friends here.
So, okay. All right. I tried to take this as low level as possible. First off, out of the gate, here are the levels. Here are the existing contract clauses. Do we have this? Yes. Okay. We've logically answered this. Next up, is the type of CUI we have likely to have a certification requirement? Highlights the type of CUI that you have. Falls in this column, yes or no. Then we show them the timeline. PALT is the average award time, as you know, Jacob and I have talked about before, of when we anticipate this to be a requirement of contract awards. Right now, that's tentatively October of this year. Then we throw in, hey, primes are getting more serious about this, even if the DoD is a longer timeline. Little reference to maybe some urgency if people primarily work with primes. What if we don't do CMMC? No net new contracts, option years, things like that. And then this one's a fun one. How do we leverage our certification to expand our business opportunities? So using USA spending and looking at your NIST codes for the DoD being the awarding agency, you can actually look at the potential business opportunity. You can also qualify set-asides and things like that in your search criteria and see how much more work might be out there. Now, you know, you're not going to win $1 billion, trillion something dollars. This is over the 2024 fiscal year. You know, you're not going to win all of that, but likely with a CMMC cert and a smaller supply chain, you'll be able to have a stab at a larger portion of that. And then after this will be timeline and cash flow diagrams of the money and time it takes to get compliant with our solution. But this is like the first half that I'm kind of workshopping. The Summit 7 blog's a great one, Dark Green. You shouted that out. But just trying to like incrementally say, we have these contract clauses. We have this type of CUI. This is going to require us to be certified. We got to get certified fast. Oh, by the way, there's a huge business opportunity if we do this. And then entering into how much it actually costs and the cash flow of that. That's kind of the general logic that I have. I think something like that would be very useful for executives.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see. Mr. Quarant said, any suggestions for securing physical CUI? Boy, this was a big debate while I was gone, apparently. Physical CUI. I'm told it's not practical, especially on the shop floor where machinists use it, but that effectively puts everyone in scope. Maybe by physical CUI means hard copy. Data, not the parts, which is a whole rabbit hole that we probably don't want to get into right now. But for physical CUI, I'm going to go with like hard copy prints and things like that.
So I went to a machine shop a month ago here in Huntsville, walked in the door, and you know what I see posted above every workbench? A printed copy of what is CUI across every workbench, showing them either how to do this or for QA QC reasons. And the short answer is you're right. That CUI is everywhere. People doing an enclave don't usually fully understand the scope of CUI. Not saying enclaves are bad, but more things are typically in scope than you think they are. So this particular organization was trying to do an enclave, but we realized that we could harden the physical systems, which were only a handful, but then we had to make every user in that building an authorized viewer of CUI, so security awareness training and things like that. So the technological lift was a lot lighter doing an enclave, but that did not leave the building out of scope. It did not leave all the people out of scope or a large portion of them. All of those things were still actively in scope. So the short answer is you're going to have to at least bring that shop floor in scope. Which in reality, most machine shops and manufacturing facilities I've been to, that's the majority of the building. So at that point, you might as well just secure the whole infrastructure.
And that's part of the reason why the physical security controls are there, right? I mean, they talk about this in, from the earliest days of the CUI program as physical facility security because of the way that the hard copy stuff flows around organizations. So
yeah, it's hard. Or go digital. I mean, that's the other side of it, right? Just go digital. And again, you have to be very careful about who can access those files. So it goes back to the people themselves, right? Who can view this information time and time again. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I believe Megan and whoa.
Wow.
I didn't know it was going to be so big.
I thought it would like drift to like part 2 and part 3. And...
I thought it would just okay. Apparently they updated things because they used to just cut off a question that would be too big and I'd read it off the side, but we'll all read it together for Megan's segment here. Oh, wait, no, that's not the right one. Where is it? Okay. Nope, that's not the right one. Okay, here it is. You can still see my bald head. Hold on, I got to dip down. All right. So random question. Upon project closeout, we need to back up our project CUI data. Interested on your thoughts. Is it sufficient to keep the backup drives in a fireproof lockbox in our locked CUI enclave office, or should they be held office site? Maybe held offsite? Also, is it okay to store the backup drives together in one lockbox, even though they are for different CUI projects? No, only the CFO and cybersecurity officer would have access to this lockbox. Wasn't sure what others do in this situation. What do you think about? All right, here we are.
Here we are. We're back. We're back, baby. I think it all comes down to confidentiality, right? There are two kind of major ways for confidentiality to take place: physical protection of that CUI and or encryption. Those are the two major things. And if you're physically protecting this CUI with those requirements, it can be in a safe that's locked in an office that's secured, that you're monitoring authorization to. It doesn't have to be stored offsite. I mean, it can be stored offsite. But again, you have to follow kind of those same procedures. There's not a reason that that shouldn't be acceptable. Jacob, thoughts?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I would definitely have to go back and double check, but yeah, I don't recall there being any prohibitions against, different CUI from different projects or anything like that. No. The same requirements apply to the same kind of data. Theoretically, you could have completely different categories of CUI and the same requirements will apply to it. So if you are doing controlled technical information type work for the DoD and you're dealing with tax information from the IRS, because that's the nature of your business, you could have them in the same, physical facility secured office setup. That was the whole point of sort of normalizing the requirements between the different setups. We talked about this a while ago, Daniel, and I don't think we ever finished sort of going down the rabbit hole, but we were talking about if you have offsite destruction of CUI and they just walk off with it, how does that work in terms of data flow, right? Because
it goes back to the ESP. Like there's not a world where I can come around that they are not an external service provider. And layers on top of that with export control data, if they're not shredding it on site and you can verify they're a US person or potentially citizen, depending on the type of data, like you can't use them. There has to be some level of shared responsibility between you and this ESP, unless they're just showing up with the truck, shredding it at your location, and then you taking the bags to destroy them. Or if they're shredded appropriately, they could take the bags. But
all right, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. Marketing brainstorm, everybody. Need your help in chat. Daniel and I start a YouTube series where we create a fake data destruction company. We undercut the price of the other data destruction Iron Mountains out there, and we see what kind of data we can get people to give us if we just have like a logo on a van and drive around the various places where the DIB is highly concentrated. Without having any kind of agreement for data destruction, ITAR, anything like that, and just what kind of data we could get a hold of. Would you watch it? Would you be interested in a series like that? I think it would be pretty interesting.
I would watch that every day.
Like reverse dumpster diving. We don't have to dive in the dumpster. They'll just give it to you.
They will. You drive around Huntsville enough and they see a secure CUI and ITAR destruction company, right? They're like, oh, that's what I need that, Yeah. A lot of people don't verify.
All right. People say they're going to watch it. So,
all right.
Producer Dustin will have to make a note here and maybe do this as a series, because that would be pretty great. Yeah, I will bet you a GCC high license that people will give us. They will give us a wild amount of data.
Oh, they will.
And you probably don't even have to really try. So
no,
that would be great. That would be great. All right, let's see here. Verify subs, 48 CFR, initiatives for handling CUI. Pointing to here we go. Okay. How does the inverse of the Lockheed/supply chain work? They'll have subs who need to mark up engineering docs that are CUI, do all of the downstream subs need to be assessed CMMC certified? We have word from Lockheed directly on this, actually, as it just so happens. No speculation required. Drum roll, everybody, while Daniel pulls it up. What do you think the answer is?
Yes.
The answer is yes.
The answer is yes. I'm trying to find the screen here.
The answer is yes. If you are a supplier and you are marking up work that is CUI and the CUI is flowing down to you, the requirements flow down to you, and based off DoD policy, if the prime needs to be CMMC Level 2 and you handle the same data, you need CMMC Level 2 certification. And according, as Daniel has right here, Lockheed's most recent supplier series memo that we got the podcast, the video, the blog about, was it? Let's see. DoD contractors, subcontractors who manage CUI within scope of their DoD contracts must meet CMMC Level 2 requirements, or NIST SP 800-171 Rev 2. All requirements must be fully implemented to fully satisfy the requirements for CMMC Level 2. And then, as we heard through the grapevine from their meeting, they said, you need the cert if you're going to do the work with us. Self-assessment requirements expected in the initial phase, certification requirements to follow approximately 1 year later. We've talked about this in terms of DoD discretion and the phased rollout. Yeah, if they're handling the CUI downstream, they're going to need the Level 2 cert.
And that's from 32 CFR.
Yeah.
That language comes. So like if you look at, and we showed this slide a fair amount, you look at this fun slide, prime gets cert, have to flow CUI down, sub has to have cert. If they can self-attest, their subs can self-attest. The only kind of weird fork in the road is CMMC Level 3. If the prime's Level 3, they can go to a CMMC L2 certified sub or L3 certified sub. That's the only nuance kind of between the flow down requirements, again, specifically for CUI at levels 2 and 3.
Yep.
Yep.
That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it.
Yep. There we go.
Yeah, there you go. All righty. If we seek Level 2 certification using NIST SP 800-171 Rev 2, if we seek Level 2 certification using NIST 171 Rev 2, the
Q1 of
Q1, if we get it in 2026 and are found to be compliant, would we need a reassessment later that year or another audit before 2029 with 171 Rev 3? Okay. So let's say Q1, you have your Level 2 cert in Q1 of 2026.
Okay.
Would we need a reassessment later in 2026? No.
No. Valid for 3 years. Now, unless you have a significant change, which we'd love to talk about that, that we're actually going to write a blog on it. Jill, if you're watching this, this is me officially saying publicly, we will have content around this.
Tune in and watch Daniel volunteer for work, everybody.
That's right. That's right. Thanks, marketing. Yeah, you won't have to. Your cert's valid for 3 years. And there's no language that we've seen the proposed 48 CFR, the public comments, the 32 CFR that would indicate if a new version comes out, you would have to recertify.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Would we need another audit before 2029 with 171 Rev 3? Well, I do agree that 171 Rev 3 would probably be the requirement before 2029. But if, let's say 171 Rev 3 becomes the requirement, you get your cert in Q1 of 2026, 171 Rev 3 is the requirement in Q3 of 2026. If everything we can tell right now, you're not going to need to recertify because your cert is valid for 3 years. It's part of the reason why it helps to, we talked about this when we were dealing with the 171 Rev 3 transition, where it pays to have 171 Rev 2 certs done in case when the final rule came out, we didn't know what version they were going to assess against. If the final rule came out and they said we're going to assess against Rev 3, then, if you had a JSVA that said we have Rev 2 and we're good for 3 years, then you don't have to worry about it. So no, if you have it in Q1 of 2026, congratulations. You won't need a new cert later in 2026. You shouldn't need one before. Well, you would need need to recert before 2029 based off the expiration of your CMMC certification.
And if Rev 3 is the certification for level 2, the control set goes live prior to your renewal, at time of your renewal is when you would have to certify to the new version of Rev 3.
Yeah, Sam says, I think they are asking if the year 2029 is covered or if the reassessment needs to be.
It's a 36-month timeline instead of a calendar year. So
it needs to be
36 months from your certification date. If Rev 3 pops up between now and then, chances are at the end of your 3 years, likely DoD will have made contract modifications or clause modifications, I guess. Then you'll likely have to do Rev 3 for your renewal.
Yeah, for sure. Alrighty, everybody. Well, it's already an hour. The time always flies by. If you haven't heard yet, we're doing the Summit 7 Labs. Our mad scientist alter egos are doing a virtual event August 26th, where we're going to be going through a bunch of awesome content, a bunch of great information. So be sure to check that out and register for what's going on. It's free, and it's always a good time. Our little summer events are always really fun to put together. So you can check that out. We do this stream every Friday. We do a podcast every Thursday. Daniel has a podcast that comes out every Monday now.
Every other Tuesday? Yeah.
Just check out the YouTube channel and like and subscribe. There's so many videos now, I can't even keep track. It seems like there's something new almost every day of the week. You follow us on LinkedIn. You can send us DMs if you got questions. You can fill out the form on CUIHotline.org for questions. You can call the number, and then you can tell us your question if you want to, and we'll go from there. I had a great vacation. The Real Lives of Mormon Wives reunion show is on, so I got to go check that out tonight. I got a bunch of interesting things to do, everybody. I hope your summer is going great, and we'll see you next week.
See y'all.